to Just Plain Wrong, the podcast where three Mennonite librarians discuss depictions of Amish, Mennonites, and other plain groups in popular culture. I'm Abby Nafziger, and I'm here with Erin Milanese and Tilly Yoder. This week, we are wrapping up season 1 of our podcast. We'll be taking the next 5 weeks off to plan, recharge, and maybe even read something that isn't an Amish romance. This week, we will be chatting about highlights from the past 19 episodes. To start us off, here are a few stats from season 1.
So yeah, I have some listener stats to share. These are fun. So to post a podcast, you need to use a third-party program that hosts your podcast and then distributes it to all of the platforms you guys use to stream, like iTunes and Spotify and all that. So according to those statistics, the top 10 locations of our listeners are Goshen, which is like a whopping 10% of our listeners. So thank you, Goshen. Chicago. And then we have a tie in third place between Wellman, Iowa and Columbus, Ohio, which Tilly and I sort of see as a duel between our family and home communities. So come on, Wellman, you can do it.
Yoder's listen faster.
I feel like you have a bit of an unfair advantage just given that Columbus is a giant city.
It is. It only has one Mennonite congregation, though. How many Mennonite congregations does Wellman have?
Actually, Wellman only has one. Now, if you venture over to Kelowna, you got about 12. Okay. But all right, so that's our top 4. Then Indianapolis in 5th, Elkhart, Indiana, Portland, Oregon, Toronto, Ontario, Centennial, Colorado, and then another tie in 10th place between Philadelphia, Atlanta, and then a city that we are all a little perplexed by, Westlake Stevens, Washington. We don't know anyone there. For a while, they were like our second highest location. So, hey, if you're listening, we're curious about you and how you found us. People from 26 different countries have listened, and people from every continent but Antarctica, which isn't actually included in the stats. So
we also have some content stats. I am nerdy enough, and well, we are collectively nerdy enough that we decided that it would be fun to keep track of the number of tropes that we ran into over and over again. So in the course of the 10 books, 3 movies, 2 TV shows, and 1 music video that we have reviewed, we have discovered 5 incidences where people wearing plainclothes get in a fist fight, 5 threatenings of shunning, 5 examples of pretending to be Amish, 3 buggy accidents. We expected more. We also managed to interview 4 guests, which we are very grateful for. It was a 50-50 Canadian-American split on our guests.
So in this episode, we are going to be discussing various episodes and things that we liked, things that we didn't like. Yeah, and just chit-chatting a little bit as we wrap up a whole season. This is our 20th episode, which is a little bit mind-blowing to me. So I thought we would start off with just what was maybe the most surprising book or movie moment. For me, probably actually the ending of Silent Light. I just was not expecting a resurrection at the end of that.
Gee, I wonder why.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't have a lot of expectations of the film by that point because it was a lot of things that were kind of unexpected. So that's probably my first pick. A close second would probably be the surprise tornado in an unlikely Amish match. And that's not just because the tornado was literally snuck up on the main characters, which I will always find hilarious. But that ending of that book, just there was a lot going on and a lot happened in about 24 hours. So a tornado, well, sure, might as well fit that in there.
Yeah, for me, well, first of all, rewatching Witness was a good reminder of how bad our memories are. So that was surprising in a different way. I thought I remembered things and turns out I didn't. So that was surprising. But I also I have really fond memories of that very first book we read. What was it called? His Pretend Amish Bride. With the camels, and it was, I think, the first one that we had all read, so there was everything was surprising and exciting, and then to get to the very end and have that amazing camel milking scene, it'll always have a special place in my memory.
I would probably say Silent Night, except for I inadvertently spoiled myself for the ending. So I think probably the most surprising moment for me was the discovery of who the murderer was in True Confections, because I had no idea what was going on in that book, and I was willing to accept that it could be anybody, but I had forgotten that the owner of the store existed. So when it turned out to be him, I was kind of surprised.
To be fair, I feel like the author was also surprised. It was just like, oh, it's going to be this guy.
I suspect so.
All right. So what about, that kind of segues nicely. What about least favorite book or movie or character? Maybe, yeah. What was your least favorite thing? Erin, why don't we start with you?
We've already mentioned Silent Light. It wasn't my least favorite, but I will definitely be okay if I never have to watch that movie again. But there were two books that were particularly terrible, kind of for different reasons. Amish Husband for Tilly was just bad. Yeah. But probably my least favorite was actually Meadow Queen, which we read pretty early on. I'm glad we read it because it gave us a window to talk about, you know, historical roots of Anabaptism. But the book itself was just filled with weird things that didn't fit, and it wasn't a genre that I liked. And yeah, I just didn't like that book at all.
Yeah, pretty much the same things. I think it's a toss-up for me between whether I disliked An Amish Husband for Tilly or Mennonite Queen more. Because An Amish Husband for Tilly was a quick read, but I deeply disliked the gender essentialism and just the whole content and the plot didn't work for me on a conceptual level or an execution level. But Midnight Queen was just long and kind of a slog to get through, but I sort of appreciated what it was trying to do a little bit more. Yeah, I don't think I'll be rereading either of those.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna echo that as well. Interestingly enough, I really enjoyed our conversation about the Mennonite Queen. I enjoyed the chance to talk about Munster. I think we pronounced it multiple different ways during the podcast, so it would make sense to continue that trend. But specifically in that book, I think they might be my least favorite characters, specifically because they felt so flat and forced. I actually found I enjoy historical fiction more, so I enjoyed other parts of that novel more than I think either of you did, but the characters specifically were not my favorite. So let's flip that around and talk about what our favorite book or movie or character was from the past season.
I think my favorite piece of media that we reviewed probably is Witness. And I feel a little weird saying that because it's not a movie without flaws or anything, but it's one that I have thought of continually throughout the season, in part because it sets so many of these other tropes in motion, and so many aspects of the genre are callbacks to Witness. Also because it was well executed. You know, the acting is, I would say, pretty good, and the cinematography is beautiful, and the music was good. So overall, I think Witness was just a solid piece of media. I also wonder how much of my appreciation for that movie was just the bar being set low by some of the other things we watched and read. Like For Richer or For Poorer. That set the bar pretty low for movies. As far as favorite characters, I think my favorite couple was probably Susanna and Micah from An Unlikely Amish Match, our Goshen book. I think their courtship was kind of quick, and I'm a little worried about their financial stability because I don't think an Amish taxi is going to provide much for a large family. But it wasn't instantaneous love. It wasn't like pressed into or coerced by anyone in the situation. Like I have hope for their relationship in the future in a way that I don't for some of the other couples that we ran across.
Yeah, I agree. Unlikely Amish Match was, I think, it was interesting to look at the list of books and be like, oh yeah, I think that was easily my favorite. It was just like Abby already mentioned the tornadoes. Like it was just full of surprises, but yet was fairly well written with characters that seemed relatively believable, like that they might end up together. Too Many Crooks was also, more enjoyable than some of our others. Yeah, I also really enjoyed getting to talk about TV shows. I had a lot of fun watching Third Rock from the Sun, and it was better than I thought it would be. And I love Schitt's Creek, so getting to watch that for the podcast was also a highlight.
Yeah, that just reminded me of how confused I was as I sat there watching some random episode of 30 Rock, trying to figure out when the Amish were going to come in. So that's technically not anything we watch for this podcast, but it was up there in my favorite things. Yeah, I think in terms of favorite, I would probably also echo Tilly's call out of The Witness. It's going to be hard to, I think, top that one in terms of quality. Not to say that it didn't have its issues, but it had a very high quality throughout. I think in terms of favorite couple, I might actually go with, and I don't remember their names because that was not very memorable for me, but actually all the way back to the couple from His Pretend Amish Bride.
I have the names.
Oh, excellent.
Priscilla Ebersol and Gabe Kaufman.
Ah, okay, yes. So from His Pretend Amish Bride. Now that's obviously, as Erin said, way back to the beginning, but I still enjoyed things about how they were as a couple, and I thought they had more going for them than some of the other ones. And then in terms of other favorite character, I actually, despite her being a kind of awful person, Magdalena Yoder from Too Many Crooks, Spoil the Broth, was up there on my list, mostly because she was interesting enough that I want to read more. So I'm maybe in season 2, we'll end up reading another one from that series because I want to find out if she evolves at all. Like that series has 20 books in it now.
22.
Wow, 22. It would not be an episode of Just Plain Wrong if we didn't have a couple rants thrown in here, because it's something that we do. Any favorite things to rant about from the season as a whole?
I need to rant about the way that non-English words, specifically Pennsylvania Dutch, German words, are treated in these books. And this is a problem that I've become aware of, in part because places like New York Times and Los Angeles Times have adapted their style guides to say that they will no longer italicize foreign words. Current thinking is that it's just another mark of something that is other, and that, or when we're writing English and we use italics, which is something to provide emphasis, and that when native speakers of a language are switching back and forth between a language or multiple languages, they don't stop and say like, ah, yes, I pulled into the driveway and then I walked into my house, they don't, and that's exactly what happens in these books. It's just like, let's just take the top 20 most common words in any language. I'll turn those into Pennsylvania Dutch, and I'll just like Control F replace them. So you'd be walking around in a normal life and they'd be telling you about something day to day, and the next thing you know, someone is asked to come inside the house. And you just think, like, there's an easy English analog for that. Like, don't just like plop in random words. It actually pulls me out of the story more than it puts me into it. And I know that it's just to make it like exotic and to make, to remind the readers that this is not your life and that people do things differently. But it's not like you wouldn't italicize the word sauerkraut if your character is eating sauerkraut. Like you would just use the word, and then if you're reading it and you don't eat sauerkraut personally, you would just be like, oh, that's a reminder that this is happening in a world that's not my own. It's a world where people like sauerkraut. Or it's a world where there's no electricity. Like, there are so many ways to signal to the reader that this is a different world. And, like, just italicizing and throwing in random vocabulary is not an effective way to do that.
I think we should do a quick rundown of some of the more common words that we can just think of off the top of our heads. So I know like Wunderbar was in there a lot, and Gott, G-O-T-T for God. And when we did Minding the Amish Baby, the baby was always what, the bobble or something like that?
Yeah. Baby was always up. Usually the words for like mother and father and sister and brother.
Dottie.
Yeah. Dottie House.
Maybe we'll be fluent by the time we
Yeah.
hit episode 50.
Although bobble, or I don't even know how you say that exactly. Bobbly? I don't know. But it does remind me of one of my favorite lines from a different book where they talk about the bulbous cheeks of the baby. So then if you combine it, you can talk about the bulbous bulble. The bulbous
The
bulble cheeks.
baby's bubbless.
Bubbless.
Yeah, that's hard to say.
Bubbles, bubbless. Nope, definitely can't say that.
So I don't know if this is a rant, but the other thing that I think all of us have been reflecting on and feel the need to say a bit more about is just the role of race in these books, in particular after last week's episode where we were discussing Belle with Alyssa, and then we had that quote from the author at the end that just really laid out some of the problems with these books. And, we had talked about that with Valerie Weaver Zerker early on, like the absence of any people of color in these books, like makes it a little hard to talk about, but why are these books set in these communities, and what does that mean, and what does that say about these authors, and what are they trying to say? And then to have an author actually come out and basically like say that she writes these books because she, I don't know, clearly she has some opinions on the current state of the United States that are different from ours. Yeah, and it's troubling to have that laid out so clearly.
I mean, a lot of issues about racism have different layers. There's obvious racism and there's covert racism, and it felt like her statement about how she likes this genre of both the Amish writing and the fairy tales as a way of escaping from, quote unquote, the troubles, escaping to an all white place where you don't have to worry about race. And of course, as I think all of us continue to learn about issues about white supremacy, that is pretty clear that it's not something that you escape from, it's something that you work to undo. So I feel like it's important to talk about that in this genre. I'm not sure that this genre is definitely not the only place that kind of thing happens. We have not read in the wider Christian inspirational romance. And I'm guessing we could find this type of thing in other genres as well. But as Valerie laid out in her book and in our episode together, it really is been interesting to see how Amish are sometimes used as a coded way of saying an all white world, either intentionally or unintentionally by the authors.
Like for any non-Amish or non-Amish person to write about Amish feels a little weird and slightly exploitative, but I'm almost more okay if they're just doing it to make a quick buck versus like trying to say something about how they think the ideal community or the ideal family looks. Like that's a more troubling implication to me.
And another spin-off to that too is the sort of idea that Amish culture is a white heritage that people should protect too is sort of a troubling concept, as with our author from last week's episode. The idea that like this is a way of life that's under fire. We have to, honor this way of life without ever being critical of it. A couple generations ago, the same rhetoric was applied against people who were Pennsylvania Dutch because we were at war with Germany, and they wanted to rename sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage. It's like all of a sudden there's this dialogue about how Germans are white enough now, so that the descendants, who have kept to their ways and their traditions are suddenly honorable and should be used to uplift a white way of life, when historically that hasn't necessarily been a dominant narrative in the United States and Canada. And so it troubles me that people are appropriating Amish culture and Mennonite culture for this. It troubles me that they're also idolizing it without being like truly understanding or critical. It bothers me that they uplift the white culture to the extent that it clearly denigrates non-white cultures. It's problematic all around.
Well, as you can tell, we obviously have a lot of thoughts about race and how that impacts the topics that we discuss in this podcast. So I'm sure that's going to come up again in season 2 as we continue to wrestle with that. Moving on to another slightly more lighthearted topic, let's talk about embarrassing podcast related stories. And Erin, I think you might have something fun to share with us.
So there's an episode we've recorded, but it hasn't aired yet, in which we each read a book that has to do sort of with like Amish sci-fi. And I read a book, so you'll learn about this book more specifically next season, but I read a book that I meant to make fun of about Amish vampires, and I ended up actually quite liking it, surprising to everyone, including myself. But I didn't want to pay for the second, because of course it's a young adult book, so there was like 4 in the series. The first was free on Amazon. So I wanted to get the second one, but I didn't want to pay for it. So I submitted a purchase request to my public library. And that was embarrassing enough because they only give you like 100 characters to explain why. And that wasn't enough to explain my shame. And then even worse was like 3 days later, they denied my purchase request. So I still don't have the book. And IMCPL, Indianapolis Marion County Public Library, knows that I want to read this book, and then they said they couldn't find it through their provider. So
did you try requesting it through interlibrary loan?
I might try that next, because funny, Alyssa, who was on last week, I recommended that she read this book. She also liked it, and she got her library to buy it, so I think I can ILL it from her library.
Nice.
Success.
There you go. Oh, I was just gonna say, I can't think of anything.
You did make us edit out your injury in episode like 3.
Oh, yes. I did tell, perhaps in hindsight, slightly, maybe too personal injury incident. And so I definitely made people edit it out. But I will just say in general, so we record these frequently on Thursday nights. We usually start about 7:30 and we're usually wrapping up by about 8:30, sometimes 9, depending on how things are going. I am almost always yawning significantly by about 9 o'clock because I need to go to bed early in order to survive this current stage of life. So, but yeah, as someone who still considers herself at least mildly young, to be yawning quite that much at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night is a little bit embarrassing.
I've learned that I procrastinate, and our text threads will be full of Abby and Erin talking about a movie or a book or something, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm halfway through when I haven't started it. And then
I'll
finish it the night before. Yeah, so that's how I ended up spoiling Silent Light for myself, was just waiting until the night before to watch it. And then seeing some texts that I should have been prepared for. This is an area where I need to improve. This is why I'm confessing us. I'll do better next season.
I have definitely finished a few books like right before our discussion, so you are not alone in that. Mm-hmm. So maybe this segues nicely into things we've learned. So are there any things that we feel like we have learned about Mennonites or something related to that through this podcast? Tilly, do you want to start us off?
Yes, these books have taught me that if you do something that at least one person in your community disapproves of, that is grounds for shunning.
Yeah,
that is a false thing that it has taught me, but that is what these books seem to believe. Things that I've actually learned, I've definitely gotten a lot of refreshers. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't thought about since I took Anabaptist Mennonite history in college. In particular, the history and lifestyle of Mennonites in the Mexican colonies was something I knew very little about. I was very grateful to Rebecca for giving us an overview and some more information about that when we watched Silent Night with her.
Yeah, same. That was an episode that jumps out as one where we had to have a guest because I don't think any of us knew a whole lot about that. Also, yeah, just some fun little tidbits like learning the hard way by getting several corrections sent to us that the Bern, Indiana Amish community keeps their buggies uncovered. And then, even though we all admitted to hating Menno Queen, that was also a good refresher, a good reminder of some of like the early Anabaptism stuff.
I agree with both of those. I think the only other thing I would add is that I have enjoyed having reminders frequently that Amish communities differ from place to place, and there's lots of different practices, and sometimes, yeah, you can be surprised in what is happening in different locations. Anything else that you've learned specifically about podcasting? We started off, in August of last year with zero knowledge about podcasting. So we have all come quite a long way. So anything specifically that you want to share? How about you, Erin?
I feel like I don't want to imply that I like disrespected podcasters previously, but I feel like I have a lot of respect now for people who podcast and like some that like people who do this professionally. Like there's a lot of time involved. So I guess I would say it's both relatively easy to start a podcast. You just need a recording device and a place to upload it. But if you want to actually, make it sound good, you have to learn how to edit. You have to find time to read the books. You have to plan an outline. So yeah, I've just learned a lot about the process, and serious respect to the podcasters out there putting out like multiple episodes a week. Like how do you have time to do that?
Yes. Great. How about you, Tilly?
Ditto to what Erin said. I mean, there are tips and tricks I picked up. I certainly learned to repeat myself a lot more if audio goes out or my earring is making noise against my microphone. Editing is a wonderful thing, but it's also time consuming. Yeah. It takes work. It's been rewarding, but it's work.
I think my biggest thing, I feel like, is the importance of having good collaborators, not to be all mushy, but I've just been really grateful for all of the work that Erin and Tilly have put in. They have definitely done 90% of the editing, 100% of the social media posting, and probably 75 to 80% of the outlining. So I'm really grateful that I get to come along on the ride. I will say the other learning curve has been really interesting. I think like a lot of people going into this, I did not like the sound of my own voice, and I still don't love it. But having worked through helping to edit and listen back to podcasts has really helped me just get over that dislike and being like, oh, my voice. It's just a voice. Everyone, we have them, they're fine. So that's been a helpful lesson in terms of just getting over that. So
it's you're not taking pride in your voice. It's very human. We have voices. They're fine.
Yeah. So looking forward a bit, what are some things that you're looking forward to, either about our little mini break coming up, or maybe things that we're looking forward to about season 2?
In terms of season 2, I'm not sure that looking forward to is the right way to say this, but I feel like something we have to do in season 2 is read an Amish erotica book. And, our parents listen to this podcast. I think Tilly's grandparents listen to this podcast. So how we talk about Amish erotica is, I'm not sure, but there's so much of it now that I feel like we have to branch out from our chaste Hallmark style cozy romances and, read something with some stuff in it. Yeah. And I also like just exploring different genres that are out there. Like there's darker Amish thrillers than the cozy mysteries we've read. I found an Amish cowboy book yesterday that I'm curious about. So that's some of what I'm looking forward to in season 2.
Similarly, there's a lot of tropes we haven't even touched on yet. We've got our clean Amish and billionaire romance book that crossed my desk a few days ago. I think we need to read that one. It's also about an Amish nun, apparently, so I think it's going to get a lot wrong. And when I skimmed it, I'm like 70% sure that it was written by a bot and not a human. But we'll have to figure that out later. So I'm interested in seeing some truly horrific examples, and I'm interested in seeing if we can find, like, if we get around to Beverly Lewis, some of the real pillars of the genre, and seeing what really good examples look like. And thrillers, there's so many apocalyptic zombie ones out there that we haven't even touched on yet. Yeah. It'll be interesting.
I'm also interested. We have not really branched out into the genre of like Amish reality TV shows, of which there are a few. So I think maybe getting into that in season 2 could be interesting. I'm not sure. Again, not sure I'm looking forward to, but think it should be explored. Well, it does seem like we should have a few Mennonite moments to wrap up this season. And it looks like Tilly actually has 2 to share with us this week.
Yes. My friend Kelly reached out to me several weeks ago and said that she was missing potlucks because of the pandemic so much that she made and then ate a batch of deviled eggs. And I think that's delightful, and I also want to do that now.
Me too.
And I had a sort of meta moment when I went to the local Mennonite Central Committee thrift store and was perusing through books, and I found a Herald Press cookbook, Simply in Season, that I did not happen to own, and I bought it, and it was on sale, and the proceeds went to Mennonite Central Committee. So it was sort of, it felt special.
Stars in your Mennonite crown for that one,
yes,
for sure.
Yes.
To wrap up the season, we have a lot of people we'd like to thank. No podcast exists in a vacuum, and ours is the same. So we have a number of people we'd like to thank. Our season 1 guests. Those were Valerie Weaver-Zerker, Rebecca Jansen, Andrew Unger, and Alyssa Everling. So we're really grateful for all 4 of them. And I'm sure we'll have some guests happening in season 2.
We would also like to give a particular shout out to our friends and my coworkers at the Mennonite Historical Library, Joe and Beth, for being fonts of amusement and information and just continual inspiration for things to look at and Mennonite moments and loving corrections.
Speaking of that also reminds me, I wanted to thank Beth Landis for being one of our regular correspondents. She has written in a number of times with great things to share, including a extensive and fascinating memo about her experiences walking with individuals who have left or who are considering leaving the Amish faith, which is another whole issue that we want to dive into more, hopefully in season 2. And I also wanted to thank my friend Miriam Augsburger for playing the outro music that we have been using the second part of the season.
I also want to say a special thank you to my friend Jaleh, who back when we were first starting this podcast answered so many of my questions about audio editing and podcast hosting and how to get started. And that was just an incredible resource to have when we literally didn't know anything about how to do this. So a huge thank you to her. She actually has her own podcast called The Heart Chicks Present. That's HART, Heart. And they're just about to launch their 3rd season, which they will be discussing romantic comedies. So check that out if you are interested in that. And also just a huge thank you to all of our listeners. A podcast is fun to do, but it's even more fun when people actually listen. And we continue to be blown away by how many people actually have listened. So thank you to each of you who have tuned in, who have rate, reviewed, subscribed, who have shared about us on social media. We really appreciate it.
Well, that wraps up this week's episode of Just Plain Wrong, the podcast where 3 Mennonite librarians discuss depictions of Amish, Mennonites, and other plain groups in popular culture. We will be returning in July, and in the meantime, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Plain Wrong Pod, or you can email us at plainwrongpod@gmail.com. You should follow us on social media because during our break, we will be posting some things, including asking you some questions for feedback about what you liked about season 1, things you want to see more of, and feel free, things you want to see less of, although, it's still our podcast, so I guess we get to make the rules. We do always enjoy hearing your responses to the media review, especially your Mennonite moments and recommendations for future discussions. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it.